very soon the government's share of the pass-through cost, that is the fuel cost and other cost for spares and the rest of it, is going to hit like $1 billion. Now, if you have those circumstances where that is being converted into equity, because that's how they are calculating it now, the government puts in money to discharge some of these obligations. The government assumes, therefore, that it increases equity in the holdings. And we have to ask ourselves, in those circumstances, whether the return on assets calculations that they are trying to suggest, the return on equity suggestions, is that the government, so like for instance, VRA says it should be 11-point-something% return on equity. Essentially, I have a certain set of assets. I need a return to justify those assets. But you don't own those assets. Those assets are owned by the state. And the state doesn't have that same degree of expectation in terms of return on equity. So if those are the circumstances, on what basis do you demand 11% return on equity when you're a state-owned utility and the state is increasing its equity contribution due to the fact that they are paying for your fuel? You're not paying for your fuel, right? You're not paying for your space. So it's already highly subsidized by the taxpayer. So when they look at just merely, when they merely just look at the tariff and they say we are not paying enough, they forget the fact that the government is buying them fuel, the government is buying their spares, and we are paying as taxpayers through that. So in effect, we are paying more than the published tariff. We are paying the subsidy that allowed that power to flow. So we don't accept their calculations. That's as simple as that. When it comes to other dynamics in that space where we've looked, for instance, at how they compute, for instance, the how do we put it? Oh, Jesus Christ. They have a way in which, beyond the return on assets, they look at risk as a way of computing the return. So your hurdle rate in that industry. To our mind, a regulated utility that has a monopoly has almost no risk because we don't have retail choice. If you go to the United States, where in about 28 states or so, you have retail choice, people can shift. When they've been confronted with the least competition, they've gone to the regulator and demanded that the regulator more or less hobble and hobble their competitors. An example being the embedded generators. So they say, well, some of these industrial players nowadays are going to private sector operators and asking them to give us capability to generate power, and they don't have our full exposure, so we think you should regulate them even more tightly. That is because they are recognizing that industrial consumers or industrial customers now have retail choice. They can decide not to buy from ECG, in effect, therefore not buy from VRA and some of the other IPPs who are also regulated. But that fact, the fact that they don't like that, tells us a lot. It means that they are not competitive. They argue about energy levies and other things like that, which are somewhat viable. We have to look into that into greater detail. But I don't think when you look at the cost difference between the embedded generators, the operators that are essentially not part of the structure as it currently exists, when you look at their costs and you take out the contribution of the levies and the rest, I don't believe, and the analysis show, that you can account for the difference in cost between they and the regulated utilities purely on account of the levies. So it means that those embedded generators that they want PRC to hobble are fundamentally more competitive than they are. So we need to dive really deep, not just looking at just quality statistics, QS, quality of service statistics, but into their integrated resource plans. To give you an example, there are power plants within VRA's portfolio where capacity utilization is as low as 18%. And in that same category, like in solar, they are building more. How do you build a power plant where you utilize only 18% of the power plant's output? 18%. So it's like you build a factory, and that factory is designed to make 100, packs of jollof rice. You build a restaurant, and you only sell 18 packs of jollof rice. And despite that, you want to build another restaurant that also makes jollof rice. All of these things makes no sense, and nobody's really delving deep into the way in which they are organized as utilities. Last point, when ECG says that its distribution service charge is low because it inherited it from PDS, and then since it inherited it from PDS, the adjustment has not been made. It goes into this really convoluted analysis about the fact that, because we have split the assets from the management, the fact that PDS was willing to work with this low rate was because of that distinction. It makes no sense. I don't understand that point. If PDS was the concessionaire and they were willing to work with that distribution service charge, then there has to be a really compelling reason why ECG argues that that charge was fundamentally flawed.